My name is Emily Carter. And I was 36 years old when my parents disowned me on Christmas Eve and handed me the key to the house they thought I was about to lose. My mother stood in the doorway wearing her red holiday sweater, looked at me in front of 16 relatives, and said, "You are not welcome in this family anymore." Then my father placed a small silver key into my hand and said, "You'll need this when the bank takes your home." Everyone went quiet. My brother looked away. My mother smiled like she had finally won. I didn't argue. I drove home through the snow, put the key on my kitchen table beside the foreclosure, notice I had been hiding for weeks, and cried until morning. 3 days later, my bank called. The woman on the phone said, "Ms. Carter, your mortgage has been paid in full." I thought it was a mistake. Then she added, "The payment came from a private trust, under instructions prepared by your grandmother before she passed." That was when I remembered what Grandma Rose had told me 6 months earlier. If they ever use your house to shame you, don't defend yourself. Wait for the trustee. Christmas Eve started with snow falling hard enough to make the road disappear in front of my headlights. I almost turned around twice. Not because of the weather, but because I knew what waited at my parents' house. My mother's holiday smile. My father's silence. My older brother Daniel standing by the fireplace like the family prince returning to his kingdom. Still, I kept driving. Because Grandma Rose had loved Christmas. And even though she had passed away 6 months earlier, some foolish part of me thought showing up might honor her. I had wrapped a small tin of her favorite butter cookies and placed it on the passenger seat beside my purse. Inside that purse was the foreclosure. Notice I had been hiding for 3 weeks. My parents' house looked perfect from the outside. White lights along the roofline. Wreath on the door. Candles glowing in every window. Through the glass, I could see relatives moving through the living room with wine glasses and red sweaters. The kind of family picture my mother loved posting online. I parked at the curb because the driveway was full. Before getting out, I opened my purse and touched the folded notice from the bank. Final delinquency warning. 90 days past due. I had told no one except Grandma Rose before she died. Not my parents. Not Daniel. Not even my closest friend. I was embarrassed. And in my family, embarrassment was never treated like pain. It was treated like evidence. The moment I stepped inside, the room went quiet in that strange, coordinated way that told me my arrival had been discussed before I came. My mother stood near the tree in her red holiday sweater, holding a glass of champagne. My father was beside the fireplace. Daniel leaned against the mantel, looking at me with the same bored expression he had worn since childhood whenever trouble belonged to someone else. "Emily," my mother said. Not warmly. "We didn't think you'd actually come." I held up the cookie tin. "It's Christmas Eve." She looked at the tin, then at my coat, then at my face. Some people only remember family when they need something. I should have left then. Instead, I stood there while 16 relatives pretended to study ornaments and cheese plates. My Aunt Carol looked at the floor. Daniel's wife whispered something to him. My father cleared his throat but did not speak. Then my mother stepped forward and said, louder this time, "You are not welcome in this family anymore." The room went still. I heard the grandfather clock tick twice. I looked at Dad, waiting for the smallest objection. He reached into his pocket instead and pulled out a small silver key. He placed it in my palm like he was returning something dirty. "You'll need this," he said, "when the bank takes your home." For a second, I couldn't move. The key was my spare house key, the one I had given my parents years ago for emergencies. I stared at it, cold against my skin, and understood that they knew. Somehow, my parents knew about the foreclosure notice. My mother's mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close enough to hurt. Daniel told us you've been having financial trouble, she said. We think it's best if you stop pretending you're independent. I looked at my brother. He shrugged, as if exposing my private crisis at Christmas dinner had been inconvenient but necessary. You should have asked for help, he said. Instead of acting better than everyone, I closed my fingers around the key. Is that what this is? I asked. Help. My mother's eyes sharpened. This is honesty. Your grandmother spoiled you with all that talk about being strong. But strength doesn't pay a mortgage. Emily. Hearing Grandma's name in her mouth made something inside me go quiet. 6 months earlier, Grandma Rose had sat at my kitchen table, looked at the unopened bank envelope in front of me, and said, if they ever use your house to shame you, don't defend yourself. Wait for the trustee. At the time, I thought she was comforting me. Standing in my parents' living room with a key in my hand and every relative watching, I realized she had been warning me. I set the cookie tin on the nearest table. Merry Christmas, I said. My mother looked surprised. Maybe because she expected tears. Maybe because she wanted an argument. I gave her neither. I turned, opened the front door, and stepped back into the snow. No one followed me. No one called my name. By the time I reached my car, the curtains had shifted and faces were watching from the window. I drove home with the silver key on the passenger seat beside the foreclosure notice. And when I got inside, I placed both on my kitchen table. For the first time, they looked less like proof that I had failed and more like 2 pieces of a puzzle Grandma had already seen coming, 6 months before Christmas Eve. Grandma Rose came to my house on a Saturday morning with a paper bag of blueberry muffins and a look on her face that told me she already knew something I had not said out loud. I tried to smile when I opened the door, but she looked past me into the kitchen and saw the bank envelope sitting unopened beside the coffee maker. Emily, she said quietly, how long has that been there? I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her it was just a statement. Just another notice. Just nothing. But Grandma Rose had raised 3 children, buried 1 husband, survived 2 recessions, and played poker every Friday for 30 years. She knew a bluff when she saw one. He let her in, made coffee, and sat across from her at the kitchen table while the envelope waited between us like a third person. I'm behind, I finally said. Grandma did not gasp or scold me. She only reached for my hand. How far? I swallowed. Almost 3 months. Her thumb moved slowly over my knuckles. Why didn't you tell anyone? I laughed once. Bitterly. Tell Mom so she can turn it into a sermon. Tell Dad so he can look disappointed and let her talk. Tell Daniel. He'd call it proof I never should have bought the house. Grandma's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. So you carried it alone. I looked away because that was easier than admitting she was right. The house had been mine for 4 years. It was small, older, and always needed something. But it was the first place in my life where no one could tell me I was taking up too much space. Then my company downsized in March. I found contract work. Then part-time consulting. But the gap had already opened. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, medical bills from a minor surgery the year before. Everything stacked itself neatly until 1 missed payment became 2, then 3. I kept telling myself I would catch up after the next client check. That is how financial trouble works sometimes. It does not explode. It waits quietly until you are afraid to open your own mail. Grandma picked up the envelope and turned it over in her hands. May I? I nodded. She opened it. Read the notice. And set it down without judgment. Do your parents know? No. Does Daniel know? She looked toward the living room window, where the little maple tree I had planted the year I moved in was bending in the wind. Good, she said. That surprised me. Good, she looked back at me. Some people offer help. Some people collect weakness. Your mother has never known the difference. I didn't know what to say. Grandma took a muffin from the bag, broke it in half, and pushed one piece toward me. Eat. Then we're going to talk like grown women. That morning, she asked for numbers. Not feelings. Numbers. Mortgage balance. Past due amount. Interest rate. Monthly payment. Bank contact. I gave them to her because she asked like someone trying to understand, not someone preparing to accuse. When I finished, she wrote everything in a small notebook with a green cover. Grandma, please don't give me money. I said, I'm not here to make you responsible for my mess. She looked up sharply. Do not call a hard season your identity. Then she closed the notebook. And do not confuse help with rescue. Rescue makes people dependent. Help gives them room to stand back up. Before she left, she stood in my hallway and looked at the spare key hanging on the small hook beside the door. Do your parents still have one? She asked. For emergencies. Grandma's mouth tightened. Then remember this, Emily. If they ever use your house to shame you, don't defend yourself. Wait for the trustee. I frowned. What trustee? She put on her coat like she hadn't heard me. You'll know when it matters. Then she hugged me longer than usual and whispered, A home is not lost the day the bank sends a letter. It is lost the day you believe cruel people get to define what you deserve. My brother Daniel had always been the child my parents believed would carry the Carter family name forward. He was 3 years older than me. Confident, charming, and somehow always one step away from another great opportunity. When we were kids, my mother called him our future. I was called the responsible one. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Years later, I realized it meant Daniel was allowed to make mistakes because everyone assumed I would quietly clean them up. When Daniel dropped out of college after 2 years, my parents said higher education wasn't for everyone. Dad paid off his student loans anyway because, according to Mom, he just needs time to find his path. When I graduated with honors and accepted a job 3 states away, my mother complained that I was abandoning the family. She never attended my promotion dinner, but she drove 6 hours to celebrate when Daniel opened a sports memorabilia store that closed less than 18 months later. Even after the business failed, my parents called it bad timing. When I bought my little house, they called it an unnecessary risk. Looking back, I should have recognized the pattern much earlier. Every success I earned was treated like luck. Every failure Daniel experienced became someone else's responsibility. When his business collapsed, my father refinanced part of his retirement savings to help him recover. My mother told relatives Daniel had been betrayed by the economy. No one mentioned that he had ignored his accountant, borrowed too much, and refused to keep financial records. Meanwhile, I spent years building an emergency fund, paying my bills early, and living below my means. Then, one layoff erased nearly everything I had worked for. And suddenly, my parents spoke as if I had always been reckless. A month after I lost my job, Daniel stopped by my house without calling first. He walked through the front door carrying coffee like we were close, even though we rarely spoke outside family holidays. He looked around the living room, noticed the unopened bank envelopes on the kitchen counter, and smiled in a way that immediately made me uncomfortable. So, he said, Mom told me work's been rough. I nodded. I'm figuring it out. He leaned against the counter and took a slow sip of coffee. You know, you could just sell this place before the bank forces you to. Cut your losses. I looked around the room. The shelves I built myself. The old reading chair Grandma loved. The maple tree outside the front window. I'm not selling, I said quietly. Daniel shrugged. Suit yourself. But pride gets expensive. Then he asked a question that seemed harmless at the time. How far behind are you? I hesitated. I should have changed the subject. Instead, I answered honestly. Almost 3 months. He nodded thoughtfully, finished his coffee, and left after less than 20 minutes. That conversation stayed with me because he had shown almost no concern, no offer to help, no encouragement, just curiosity. At the time, I assumed he was simply being insensitive. I didn't realize I had just handed him information that would eventually become entertainment at Christmas dinner. 2 weeks later, my mother called out of nowhere. Daniel mentioned you've been stressed, she said in her sweetest voice. You know you can always move back home if things don't work out. I thanked her but said I intended to keep my house. She laughed softly. Emily? Sometimes holding on is more expensive than letting go. The sentence felt strange, almost rehearsed. But I couldn't explain why. Before hanging up, she added, Don't worry. Everything happens for a reason. Those words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. When Grandma Rose visited that weekend, I told her about Daniel's visit. She listened without interrupting, then asked only one question. Did he ask how far behind you were? I blinked. Yes. Grandma slowly nodded, as though a piece of a puzzle had slipped into place. She didn't criticize Daniel. She didn't criticize my parents. Instead, she opened her little green notebook, wrote something on a blank page, and closed it again. Emily, she said gently, never confuse someone's interest in your problems with concern for your well-being. Sometimes people ask questions because they want to help. Other times, they're collecting information they'll use when the moment is right. I looked at the notebook in her hands and asked again about the trustee she had mentioned before. Grandma smiled faintly, stood up, and kissed my forehead. You'll meet the trustee soon enough. She said, my job is simply to make sure the right person is ready before everyone else discovers there's a plan they know nothing about. The first time I saw the trustee's name, it was on a business card tucked under Grandma Rose's teacup. She came to my house the following Friday wearing her navy coat, pearl earrings, and the same determined expression she used when arguing with doctors who thought age made her easy to dismiss. I had just finished a phone interview for a consulting contract and was trying to sound hopeful, even though my bank account told a different story. Grandma set her purse on the kitchen chair, placed a white envelope beside it, and said, How soon can you drive me to First Harbor Bank? I stared at her. Grandma. Why? She took off her gloves slowly. Because I have an appointment with a woman named Patricia Lane, and I would prefer not to let your mother drive me. That was how she said it. Not because Mom was busy. Not because she didn't want to bother anyone. Because she did not want my mother there. I looked at the envelope. Is this about my mortgage? Grandma didn't answer directly. It is about making sure the right kind of help goes to the right place. I felt heat rise in my face. I told you I don't want you paying my bills. Grandma looked at me over the top of her glasses. And I told you not to confuse help with rescue. Now, get your coat. First Harbor Bank sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd. A brick building with brass doors and a lobby that always smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. Patricia Lane was waiting near the reception desk. She was in her 50s. Neat gray suit. Calm eyes. The kind of woman who had probably watched hundreds of families smile while fighting over money. Mrs. Carter, she said, taking Grandma's hand. It's good to see you again. Again. I caught that word immediately. Grandma had already been there without me. Patricia turned to me. And you must be Emily. I smiled politely. But inside I was counting questions. How did she know my name? How long had Grandma been meeting her? And why had nobody told me? We sat in a small, glass-walled office. Patricia placed a folder on the desk. but she kept it closed. "Emily," Grandma said, "I need you to listen today. Not argue." That was never a good sign. Patricia explained that Grandma had established a private trust several months earlier, separate from the family estate. It was not controlled by my parents. It was not connected to Daniel. It had specific instructions about how funds could be used. I heard the words, but they didn't fit together yet. "Grandma," I said carefully. "What did you do?" She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "I made sure love couldn't be redirected by people who call greed concern." Patricia opened the folder just enough for me to see the first page. Rose Carter Family Protection Trust. My name appeared halfway down the document. But Patricia closed the folder before I could read more. "Not everything is active yet," she said. "Your grandmother's instructions are very specific." I looked at Grandma. Active when Grandma's face softened. When they use your trouble to shame you, instead of help you. I remembered Daniel asking how far behind I was. I remembered my mother saying holding on was more expensive than letting go. Suddenly the room felt smaller. "You think they'll do that?" I asked. Grandma's answer was almost a whisper. "I think they already started." Before we left, Patricia handed me her card. On the back, in Grandma's handwriting, was one sentence: "Wait until they say it out loud." I turned the card over in my hand. "Say what out loud?" Grandma stood and buttoned her coat. The truth about who they are. That evening, after I drove her home, I sat in my car outside her apartment for 10 minutes with Patricia's card on the passenger seat. I still didn't understand the trust. I didn't know what it could do, or when it would matter. But I knew one thing: Grandma Rose had been to the bank before anyone in my family knew there was anything to fight over. And whatever she had built there was not meant to comfort me. It was meant to protect me. The foreclosure letter arrived 11 days after Grandma Rose visited First Harbor Bank. I found it folded inside my mailbox between a grocery coupon and a utility bill, as if it were just another ordinary piece of paper instead of the thing I had been fearing for months. The envelope had the bank's logo in the corner and the words "Final Notice" printed in bold across the top. I carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen table, and stood there for almost a full minute before opening it. The amount past due was listed in cold, perfect numbers. The deadline was worse: 30 days. If I did not bring the mortgage current in 30 days, the bank could begin foreclosure proceedings. I called Grandma first. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Daniel. "Grandma?" She answered on the second ring. "Did it come?" she asked. I froze. "How did you know?" She did not sound surprised or afraid. "Banks follow patterns, sweetheart. So do people." I sat down slowly. "Grandma, I don't know if I can fix this in time." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You are going to keep applying for work. You are going to keep records of every payment attempt, and you are not going to tell your mother anything she can turn into a weapon." I looked at the foreclosure letter on the table. "What about Daniel?" Grandma's voice hardened. "Especially not Daniel." That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, Daniel texted me a photo. It was not a picture of me. It was a picture of my front porch, taken from the driveway. Under it, he wrote, "Still holding on." My stomach turned. I called him immediately. "Were you at my house?" He laughed. "Relax." I drove by after meeting a client nearby. Daniel did not have clients in my neighborhood. "Why are you taking pictures of my porch?" I asked. His voice changed. Just slightly. "Mom's worried. She thinks you're not being honest about how bad things are." I looked out my front window, suddenly aware that my house no longer felt private. "Tell Mom if she's worried." "She can call me," Daniel said. She did. You don't answer when you know she's right. That evening, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Then Dad called. Then Daniel again. Finally, my mother sent a text that made the entire pattern clear. Emily, we know about the bank letter. Stop being proud and let us discuss options before you embarrass this family. I stared at the word embarrass. Not before you lose your home. Not before you get hurt. Before you embarrass this family. I forwarded the message to Grandma without adding anything. She replied 10 minutes later. Keep that. Then, a second message. Print it. The next morning, I found a business card taped to my front door. Caldwell Property Solutions. Below the name was a handwritten note, cash offer possible. I pulled it off slowly, already knowing Daniel had something to do with it. When I called the number, a man answered and said, Daniel Carter mentioned you might be motivated to sell quickly. I hung up without saying another word. For the first time, I understood what Grandma meant by people collecting weakness. Daniel had not asked about my mortgage because he cared. He had asked because he saw an opportunity. That night, I placed the foreclosure letter, my mother's text, Daniel's porch photo, and the property buyer's card into a folder. I did not call it evidence yet. I was not ready for that word. But when Grandma came over the next Tuesday, she opened the folder, looked through everything, and nodded like she had been waiting for each piece to arrive. Good, she said. Now we know they are not just watching you fall. They are measuring where you will land. I asked her again what Patricia Lane was preparing at the bank. Grandma closed the folder and placed her hand on top of it. Not yet, she said. First, they have to say the cruel part out loud. Christmas Eve was the night they finally said the cruel part out loud. I had spent the week before pretending I might still be wrong about them. Maybe Daniel had only been thoughtless. Maybe Mom had only panicked when she learned about the foreclosure letter. Maybe Dad would pull me aside, ask what I needed, and quietly prove that somewhere under all those years of silence, he still knew how to be my father. That is the kind of hope people keep when they have been disappointed for too long. It is not strong. It is stubborn. So I baked Grandma Rose's butter cookies, put them in a red tin, wrapped a ribbon around it, and drove to my parents' house through the snow. The living room went quiet when I walked in. 16 relatives, a Christmas tree, champagne glace, appetizers on silver trays, and somehow every eye found me at the same time. My mother stood near the fireplace in her red holiday sweater, smiling as if the silence had been planned. Daniel was beside her, one hand in his pocket, watching my face the way people watch a door they already know is locked. Dad stood behind them. He looked tired. He also looked away. I placed the cookie tin on the entry table and said, "Merry Christmas." No one answered immediately. Then my mother said, "Emily, we need to talk before you come any farther." I did not move. About what? My mother stepped forward. About honesty. That word in her mouth felt almost obscene. Daniel told us you are facing foreclosure. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. My Aunt Carol looked down at her plate. My cousin's wife stopped pouring wine. I felt my skin go hot. Then, cold. That wasn't Daniel's information to share. I said. Daniel shrugged. Family shouldn't keep secrets. I looked at him. That's interesting. Coming from the person who drove by my house and sent buyers to my front door. His face tightened. But my mother cut in before he could answer. Don't deflect. This is exactly what we mean. You make bad decisions. Then attack anyone who tries to help. Help, I asked. My mother turned to the room like she had an audience and a prepared speech. Emily bought a house she couldn't afford because she wanted to prove she didn't need us. Now the bank is going to take it. And she still thinks pride will save her. My father reached into his pocket then. For one breath. I thought he might hand me a check. Or a note? Or anything that looked like love. Instead, He placed a small silver key in my palm. My spare house key. "You'll need this," he said quietly. "When the bank takes your home." The room became so silent I could hear the ice shift in someone's glass. I stared at the key. It was cold from his hand. "You kept this all these years," I said. Dad's mouth moved, but no words came. My mother answered for him. "We kept it because we always knew you would need rescuing. Eventually." That was the sentence. The one Grandma had told me to wait for. If they ever use your house to shame you, don't defend yourself. Wait for the trustee. My fingers closed around the key. And for one strange second, I felt calm. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. It hurt in places I thought had gone numb years ago. But beneath the hurt was recognition. Grandma had seen this room before I did. Daniel laughed under his breath. "You could still sell before things get ugly." Caldwell Property Solutions made a fair offer. I looked at him slowly. "You sent them." He didn't deny it. My mother raised her chin. "Your brother was trying to create options." "For me?" I asked. "Or for himself?" Daniel's eyes flashed. "Don't make this about me. You made it about you when you treated my home like distressed inventory." Dad finally spoke. Barely above a whisper. "Emily, maybe selling would be practical." I looked at him. Really looked at him. And understood he had surrendered before the conversation began. I set the silver key on the entry table beside the cookie tin. "Merry Christmas," I said again. My mother's smile faltered. "That's all you have to say." I picked up my coat. "Yes." She stepped closer. "You are not welcome in this family anymore if you walk out that door." I looked at the relatives. The tree. The perfect candles. The family portrait my mother had staged for a life. None of us were actually living. Then I opened the door. Snow blew across the threshold. "Then I guess you finally said it out loud." I told her. I drove home with Grandma's warning, repeating in my head. And, when I reached my kitchen table, I placed the foreclosure letter. Daniel's buyer card. Mom's text. And Dad's returned key into the folder. At 8:13 the next morning, Patricia Lane from First Harbor Bank called. "Emily," she said, "it's time to talk about what your grandmother arranged." Patricia Lane called at 8:13 on Christmas morning. I remember the time because I was sitting at the kitchen table in the same clothes I had worn the night before, staring at the folder like it might open itself and explain my grandmother's plan. The house was quiet, except for the heater clicking on and off. Outside, snow covered the little maple tree in my front yard. My parents' silver key sat beside the foreclosure letter, Daniel's property buyer card, and my mother's text about embarrassing the family. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer. Then I saw the caller ID. "First Harbor Bank, Emily Carter Patricia," asked. Her voice was calm, professional, and somehow kind. "This is Patricia Lane. I worked with your grandmother, Rose Carter." I sat up straighter. "Is something wrong?" She paused. "No. Something is finally ready." Those words made my chest tighten. Patricia continued. "Your grandmother left instructions that I was to contact you after your family used your mortgage situation to publicly shame you." I looked at the silver key on the table. She knew that would happen. She believed it was likely. Patricia said, "But she did not want the trust activated based on suspicion. She wanted your family to reveal their intentions in their own words." I opened the folder and touched the copy of my mother's text. "They did." Patricia's voice softened. "I know. Rose asked that you keep records. And based on what you sent her over the last few weeks, we have enough to proceed." I frowned. "Proceed with what?" There was the smallest sound of papers moving on her end. "Mrs. Carter created a private arrangement through the Rose Carter Family Protection Trust. I can explain the structure in person. But the short version is this: your mortgage is being handled. I stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Handled how Patricia did not answer fully. Come to the bank tomorrow at 10. Bring your foreclosure letter. The folder you've been keeping. And the spare key your father returned to you. I looked down at the key. Why the key? Because your grandmother listed it specifically. Patricia said, she said if they returned it to you, they had stopped seeing your house as your home and started seeing it as proof they were right about you. I covered my mouth with one hand. That sounded exactly like Grandma Rose. Gentle enough to love you. Sharp enough to name the truth. Patricia. I whispered. Am I losing my house? For the first time. Her voice warmed. Not if your grandmother has anything to say about it. Then she added, and, Emily, do not speak to your parents before we meet. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time with the phone in my hand. Part of me wanted to cry from relief, but another part was afraid to trust anything I did not understand. Grandma had always hated vague promises. If she had created something, there would be paper behind it. There would be instructions, signature, dates, and a reason. So I did what she had taught me to do. I gathered everything. Foreclosure letter, Mom's text, Daniel's photo, buyer card, Dad's K, my job termination notice, bank statements, payment records, every client invoice I was waiting on. By the time I finished, the folder was thick enough that the elastic band barely closed. At Noa Doi. My mother texted, Merry Christmas. I hope you think about what we said. At Noa Shapte. Daniel texted, Caldwell. Offer expires Friday. Don't be stupid. At Noa Cincis Prezece. Dad texted only one word. Sorry. I saved every message. Not because I planned to punish them. Because Grandma Rose had understood something I was only beginning to learn. When people rewrite the past, records become mercy for the person who lived it. The next morning, I walked into First Harbor Bank with the folder under one arm and my father's returned key in my coat pocket. Patricia Lane was waiting in the lobby. And beside her stood a man in a dark suit holding a sealed envelope with my grandmother's handwriting across the front, for Emily. When they finally say it out loud, Patricia Lane greeted me with the same calm expression she had worn the last time Grandma brought me into the bank. But this time there was no small talk. Beside her stood a tall man in a charcoal suit holding a large cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. Even before I reached them, I recognized the handwriting across the front. For Emily. When they finally say it out loud, my throat tightened. Grandma had written those words months before Christmas. Months before my parents handed me back my own house key in front of 16 relatives. She hadn't guessed what would happen. She had planned for it. Patricia led me into the same glass office where Grandma and I had sat together 6 months earlier. Nothing had changed except the folder on the desk. Last time it had stayed closed. Today, it was already open. The man introduced himself as Michael Reeves, successor trustee for the Rose Carter Family Protection Trust. He shook my hand and said, Your grandmother asked me to apologize in advance because she knew this meeting would only happen after someone had tried to make you feel small. I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like Grandma. Always thinking 3 steps ahead, Michael placed the sealed envelope in front of me, but didn't ask me to open it yet. Instead, he looked at the folder I had carried into the office. Did you bring everything? I nodded and began laying documents across the table. The foreclosure notice, my mother's text, Daniel's photograph of my porch, the business card from Caldwell Property Solutions, my father's returned house key. Michael examined each item carefully, never interrupting. When he reached the silver key, He looked at Patricia and quietly said, "That satisfies the final condition." I frowned. Final condition. Patricia folded her hands. "Emily, your grandmother did not want this trust activated simply because you had financial trouble. She believed difficult seasons happen to good people. What she wanted to know was whether your family would respond with compassion or humiliation." Michael slid a single page across the table. At the top was Grandma's signature. Beneath it was one sentence: "The trust becomes active only if Emily is publicly shamed for needing help, rather than privately offered help." I stared at the page, unable to speak. Grandma had anticipated not only my financial struggle, but exactly how my parents would respond to it. Michael opened another section of the folder. "There is something important you need to understand. Your grandmother never intended to leave you a large inheritance. She believed cash disappears. Security lasts." I thought back to every conversation we'd had about independence, responsibility, and dignity. Suddenly, they all sounded different. Less like advice, more like preparation. "So, she left me the house?" I asked carefully. Michael smiled. "No." I looked down, confused. "Then what did she do?" He turned one more page but kept the rest of the document covered with his hand. "She designed a structure that protects your home without making you dependent on anyone, including the trust itself." Patricia reached into the folder and removed a certified bank letter. She placed it in front of me but covered the lower half with another sheet of paper. I could only see the bank logo and one sentence near the top: "Loan status updated." My heart started racing. "Read the last line," she said gently. I looked down. "Effective immediately. This loan is no longer held by First Harbor Bank." I looked back up at her. "What does that mean?" Michael folded his hands. "It means your grandmother did not pay your mortgage." He paused just long enough for the words to settle. "She bought it." For several seconds, I couldn't process what I had heard. I had spent weeks believing the miracle would be that someone paid my debt. Instead, Grandma had done something I hadn't even known was possible. The loan hadn't disappeared. It had changed hands. Michael nodded as if he could see the questions forming in my mind. "And before you ask," he said quietly, "the answer is no. Your parents cannot touch it. They don't even know who owns it yet." Then he reached for the sealed envelope with Grandma's handwriting and slid it across the table. "Everything else," he said. "Your grandmother wanted you to hear from her?" My hands were shaking when I broke the dark blue wax seal. Grandma Rose had always written with a fountain pen, and the first thing I noticed was the familiar deep blue ink covering the page. It felt less like opening a legal document and more like hearing her voice again. "Dear Emily, if Michael is sitting across from you, then I was right about something I prayed I would be wrong about. Your family did not offer you a hand when you were struggling. They waited until your struggle became a stage." I stopped reading for a moment and looked down at the silver key my father had returned to me. Grandma had known that key would eventually find its way back into my hands. I continued reading. "If you are wondering why I did not simply pay off your mortgage, it is because I have watched too many families mistake generosity for permission. If I gave you money, your mother would say I favored you. If I gave you the house, your brother would spend years trying to challenge my decision. If I rescued you publicly, they would tell everyone you survived only because an old woman saved you. I wanted something different for you. I wanted you to keep your dignity." Tears blurred the words for a moment. Even now, Grandma was protecting something deeper than my finances. She was protecting the story people would tell about why I survived. Michael waited until I finished the first page before speaking. "Your grandmother spent nearly a year working on this structure," he said quietly. "She revised it 4 different times." Patricia nodded. "Every version had the same goal: protect the home without giving anyone the opportunity to claim you were handed success." I looked back at the letter. Grandma had underlined one sentence: "Never let people who celebrate your hardship become the narrators of your recovery." I smiled through my tears because it sounded exactly like something she would say while serving tea at her kitchen table. The second page explained what Michael had only hinted at. Instead of paying my loan, the trust had legally purchased it from First Harbor Bank at the remaining balance. The bank had been paid in full, but the debt itself had not disappeared. It now belonged to the Rose Carter Family Protection Trust. I looked up in confusion. "So, I still owe money," Michael smiled gently. "Technically, yes." My shoulders sank for half a second before he continued. "But now you owe it to a trust that follows your grandmother's instructions instead of a bank's policies." Patricia slid another document across the table. It was titled Borrower Protection Addendum. I began reading. No late fees. No penalty interest. No foreclosure proceedings while the borrower demonstrates reasonable effort to regain financial stability. Payment reductions permitted during verified unemployment. Principal forgiveness available after 24 consecutive on-time payments following recovery of employment. I looked at Michael in disbelief. "Grandma wrote all of this," he nodded. "Every clause. We had attorneys make sure it complied with state law. But every idea came from her." I laughed softly through the tears. "She turned herself into a better bank." Michael laughed too. "That is almost exactly what she told us during the final meeting." Then Patricia handed me one final document. "This," she said, "is why your grandmother insisted we wait." Across the top it read Activation Certification. Beneath it were 3 required conditions. Financial hardship confirmed. Family publicly weaponized hardship instead of offering private support. Independent documentation, collected. Beside, each condition was a checked box. Attached behind the page were copies of my mother's text. Daniel's property buyer referral. The foreclosure notice. And the Christmas Eve summary I had written the night before. Grandma had not wanted assumptions. She had wanted evidence. Even after she was gone. She refused to let emotion replace proof. I reached the final paragraph of her letter. "Emily, one day your mother will tell people, I chose you over the family. That is not true. I chose character over entitlement. If your parents had quietly helped you, this trust would never have activated. If your brother had protected your privacy, instead of exposing your pain, Michael would never have opened this envelope. They determined the outcome, not me. Never carry guilt for a door someone else chose to close." I lowered the letter slowly. The room was silent. Michael looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "There's one more instruction," he said. "Your grandmother did not want your parents informed immediately. She wanted them to discover the truth the same way they discovered your hardship." I frowned. How Michael closed the folder carefully. "When the foreclosure notice never arrives, and the bank stops calling." Michael called it a borrower protection structure. But all I could think was that Grandma Rose had built me a better bank. Not a gift I could be shamed for accepting. Not a rescue my mother could twist into proof that I had failed. A legal arrangement with documents. Conditions. Payment terms. And protections that treated hardship like something a person could survive instead of something a family could use against them. I sat in Patricia Lane's office with Grandma's letter open in front of me, reading the borrower protection addendum again and again. No foreclosure proceedings, while the borrower demonstrates reasonable effort. Reduced payments during verified unemployment. Principal forgiveness after 24 consecutive on-time payments. Grandma had not erased responsibility. She had removed cruelty. Patricia slid a payment schedule across the desk. "For the next 6 months, your payment will be reduced to what your current contract income can support. If your employment improves before then, you can increase it voluntarily. If not, we review again." I looked at the number. It was not nothing, but it was possible. For the first time in months, possible felt like oxygen. So the bank is really paid, I asked. Patricia nodded. First Harbor has been paid in full. Your loan is no longer in default with us. No foreclosure filing will proceed. Michael added. Your obligation is now to the trust, and the trust terms are governed by your grandmother's instructions. I looked down at the silver key on the table. My parents think the bank is still taking the house. Michael's expression did not change. Then they will be confused when that does not happen. Before I left, Michael handed me certified copies of the loan transfer notice, the trust addendum, and Grandma's activation letter. Keep these somewhere safe, he said. And do not explain this to your family until they ask the right question. I almost smiled. What is the right question? Patricia answered before he could. Not, how did you get out of this? Not who paid for you. The right question is, are you okay? That one sentence almost broke me, because no one in my family had asked that. Not once. Not when they found out I was behind. Not at Christmas. Not after Dad handed me the key. Their first instinct had been judgment. Grandma's first instinct had been protection. When I got home, the house felt different. Though nothing had changed. The little maple tree still bent under snow. The kitchen still had the same cracked tile by the stove. The foreclosure notice still sat on the table. But now it looked old. Like a threat from someone who no longer had authority. I took the silver key my father had returned, walked to the hook by the front door, and hung it back where it belonged. Then I placed Grandma's letter in a fireproof box with the trust papers. I did not call my mother. I did not call Daniel. I did not post anything online. I made soup, updated my job applications, and paid the first reduced trust payment 3 days early. The first sign that my family knew something had changed came 2 weeks later. Daniel texted first. Did the bank give you an extension? I didn't answer. Then my mother called twice and left one voicemail. Emily, your father drove by and there's no foreclosure notice on the door. Did you sell to someone else? Her voice sounded irritated. Not relieved. That told me everything. She had not been worried about whether I would be homeless. She had been waiting for proof that I was wrong about myself. When the proof didn't arrive, she treated it like an inconvenience. That evening, I received an email from Caldwell Property Solutions. Daniel had apparently given them my contact information again. We're still interested in making a cash offer if your situation remains urgent. I forwarded it to Michael. His reply came 20 minutes later. Please do not respond. Also, Daniel Carter contacted my office this afternoon asking whether the property had entered foreclosure. I sat back in my chair and read that sentence twice. Daniel had not just been watching. He had started investigating. A minute later, Michael sent one more message. Your grandmother anticipated this possibility. There is a second envelope. My mother called the next morning before I had even finished my coffee. Emily, she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice before she tried to soften it. Your father drove by your house yesterday. There's no foreclosure notice on the door. I looked out my kitchen window at the little maple tree Grandma Rose had loved. Good morning to you too. Mom? She ignored that. Did the bank give you an extension? I stirred my coffee slowly. Why are you asking? Her voice sharpened. Because we're trying to understand what's going on. I almost laughed. No. You're trying to find out if I'm still failing. She went quiet for half a second. Then Daniel's voice came through the phone. So they had put me on speaker. Emily, don't be dramatic. We're just concerned. I set my spoon down. Concerned people ask if someone is okay before they ask about foreclosure notices. Daniel sighed. Fine. Are you okay? The words sounded so forced they barely counted as language. My mother cut in. Did you sell to Caldwell Property Solutions? There it was. Not concern. Inventory. No. I said, I didn't sell my house. Daniel's voice changed. Then who stopped the foreclosure? I did not answer. Grandma had been clear. Wait until they ask the right question. This was not the right question. You should call the bank. I said, maybe they'll explain it to you. My mother snapped. Don't be childish. But Daniel had gone quiet. And that worried me more. My mother reacted with emotion. Daniel reacted with calculation. Before hanging up, he said, loans leave paper trails. Emily, whatever you did, it can be found. I looked at the certified loan transfer notice in my fireproof box. Then I guess you'll find paper? I said, and ended the call. That afternoon, Michael Reeves emailed me. Subject line contact attempt. Daniel Carter called my office this morning, asking whether I represented the current holder of your mortgage. I read the sentence twice. He had not asked whether I was okay. He had not asked whether I needed help. He wanted to know who owned the loan. Michael's email continued. I gave him no information. However, your grandmother anticipated that Daniel might investigate the loan transfer. There is a second envelope, but I recommend we wait before opening it. I typed back one word. Why? His reply came 10 minutes later. Because Rose instructed that it only be opened if your family tried to use the mortgage again after the transfer. I sat there for a long time, staring at the word again. Grandma had known this would not end when the bank stopped calling. She had known my family would not accept the absence of failure as an answer. That evening, Daniel texted me a screenshot from the county recorder's website. No sale recorded. So who paid? I saved it. Forwarded it to Michael. And did not respond. 2 minutes later, my mother texted, if Grandma gave you money and you hid it from us, that says everything about your character. I saved that too. Then my father texted separately, please don't let this turn into a war. I looked at his message and whispered to the empty kitchen. You should have said that before Christmas Eve. At opt patrupe. M. Michael called. Emily. He said. Send me everything they sent today. I did. He reviewed the screenshots, the texts, and Daniel's recorder search while I waited on the line. Finally, he said, that satisfies Rose's condition. My stomach tightened. For the second envelope, yes. I heard a drawer open on his end. Paper moved. Then his voice became gentler. Your grandmother labeled this one very specifically. I closed my eyes. What does it say? Michael paused. For Emily. When they realized they lost the right to shame her. I met Michael Reeves at his office the next morning with every message printed and placed in a folder. Daniel's screenshot from the county recorder. My mother's text accusing me of hiding Grandma's money. Dad's message asking me not to let it become a war. Michael read each page without changing expression. Then placed them beside the sealed envelope on his desk. For Emily. When they realized they lost the right to shame her. Grandma's handwriting looked steady. Almost peaceful. As if she had written it, knowing exactly how this day would feel. Michael looked at me and said, Rose did not create this envelope to hurt them. She created it so you would not mistake their panic for your guilt. I broke the seal slowly. The letter inside was shorter than the first one. Emily. If they are asking who owns your mortgage now, then they are no longer worried about your home. They are worried about losing the story they plan to tell about you. That sentence made me stop breathing for a moment. Grandma had named it perfectly. My family had wanted foreclosure because foreclosure would prove them right. It would let my mother say I was reckless. Let Daniel say he had warned me. Let Dad stay sad, but blameless. Grandma continued. Do not explain your survival to people who were waiting to enjoy your collapse. Let the trustee answer only what the law requires. You owe them no tour of the door they tried to close on you. Michael slid another document across the desk. This is the formal notice we can send if Daniel or your parents continue contacting banks, property buyers, or third parties about your mortgage. The heading read, Cease and Preserve Notice. It instructed them to stop misrepresenting their interest in my property, stop referring buyers, stop contacting financial institutions, and preserve all communications related to attempts to acquire or pressure a sale of my home. I looked up. You think they'll push further? Michael's mouth tightened. Your brother already contacted a property buyer and searched county records. Your grandmother considered that escalation. Then he added, she also left instructions for Daniel. He opened a second file but did not remove the letter. We do not send this unless necessary, he said. But you should know it exists. On the folder tab, I saw my brother's name, Daniel Carter. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something other than hurt. I felt protected. Not rescued. Protected. There was a difference. And Grandma had understood it before I did. Michael handed me the cease notice draft and said, you decide whether to send it now or wait. I thought about my mother's text, Daniel's screenshot, and Dad's silence wrapped in concern. Then I remembered the spare key my father had placed in my palm in front of 16 relatives. Send it, I said. By late afternoon, Michael sent the notice by email and certified mail. My phone stayed quiet for 47 minutes. Then Daniel called. I let it ring. My mother called next. I let that ring too. Finally, Dad texted, what did you send them? I almost answered. Then stopped. The right question was still not here. No one had asked if I was safe. No one had asked if I had food. Work. A plan. Or fear. They only wanted to know what paper had blocked them. So I forwarded Dad's message to Michael and made dinner in my own kitchen while snow melted slowly from the branches outside. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of losing the house. The cease and preserve notice reached Daniel the following morning at 9:18. I know the exact time because Michael copied me on the delivery confirmation. Certified. Signed. Received. For almost 2 hours, nothing happened. Then my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Emily. This is Robert Hayes, with Caldwell Property Solutions. Daniel Carter asked us not to contact you again. We apologize if our previous communication caused concern. I forwarded the message to Michael without replying. 5 minutes later, he called. That's exactly what your grandmother expected. He said, when people realize their actions are documented, they start cleaning up the evidence. Atunci prezece șapte. Daniel called from his own number. I almost ignored it. But Michael had told me something the day before. If you answer, he said, say as little as possible. Let him reveal what he already knows. So I answered. Hello, Daniel sounded strangely calm. Too calm. Emily, he said. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I looked out the kitchen window at the snow melting beneath the maple tree. Which part? The part where you told Mom about my mortgage, or the part where you sent investors to my house? He laughed awkwardly. Come on. You know I was only trying to help. I didn't answer. Silence has a way of making dishonest people nervous. Daniel cleared his throat. Look. I did some checking. There it was. The bank doesn't own your mortgage anymore. I said nothing. That means somebody bought the loan. Another pause. Was it Grandma? My hand tightened around the phone. But I remembered Michael's advice. Never confirm what someone is guessing. Why does it matter? I asked. Daniel answered too quickly. Because if she moved assets before she died, that affects the estate. There it was. Not concern for me. Not curiosity about my home. Money. Again, I asked one question. Daniel, if the bank had taken my house like you expected, Would you have called me today? The line went completely quiet. I waited. Finally, he sighed. That's not fair. I smiled sadly. Neither was Christmas Eve. He tried again. Emily. We're family. I looked around my quiet kitchen, remembering 16 relatives watching, while Dad handed me my own key. Family doesn't wait for foreclosure notices like their lottery tickets. Daniel's breathing became heavier. Mom says, Grandma manipulated you. I almost laughed. No, I said. Grandma prepared me. There's a difference. Before hanging up, Daniel made one mistake. Our attorney says we have a right to know if trust assets were used to purchase your mortgage. I sat up straighter. Our attorney. He realized it immediately. Too late. Mom talked to someone. I wrote the sentence down on the notepad beside my coffee cup while he was still speaking. Daniel, I said quietly. Did Mom hire an attorney to investigate Grandma's trust? He didn't answer. He simply ended the call. Within minutes, I scanned my handwritten notes and emailed them to Michael. His response came almost immediately. Thank you. Rose anticipated this possibility. Please come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring both letters. I frowned. Then another email arrived. This time with no attachment. Only one sentence. If Linda Carter has retained counsel to challenge the trust, it is time for you to hear your grandmother's final instruction before anyone files anything. I read the sentence twice. Final instruction. I thought the second envelope had been the last one. Apparently, Grandma Rose had planned for one more move. And somehow she had known my mother would make it. Michael's office was quiet when I arrived the next morning. He had 3 folders on his desk, but only one was open. My name was written on the tab in Grandma Rose's handwriting. Not Emily Carter. Just Emily. For some reason, that made my throat tighten before anyone spoke. Michael waited until I sat down. Then said, Your grandmother believed your mother might eventually try to challenge the trust, not because she had a strong legal claim, but because people who feel entitled often confuse anger with evidence. He slid the open folder toward me. Inside was a signed memorandum, a physician's capacity letter, bank meeting notes, and one final page titled Statement of Intent. Rose wanted this read only if Linda retained counsel or tried to suggest the trust was improper. He said, Based on Daniel's call, we are there. I touched the edge of the page, but didn't pick it up. Did Grandma really think Mom would go this far? Michael's expression softened. No. She hoped she wouldn't. But she prepared as if she might. He read the statement aloud because Grandma had requested it that way. I, Rose Carter, create this trust while of sound mind, without pressure, confusion, or undue influence. I do not do this because Emily is helpless. I do this because Emily has spent her life being punished for needing less help than others. And I know the first time she truly needs support, some members of this family will use it to humiliate her instead of protect her. My mother, even absent, felt present in the room. So did Daniel. So did Christmas Eve. Michael continued, If Linda or Daniel claim I was manipulated, let this record show that neither of them knew about this trust, because neither of them could be trusted not to redirect it. I have helped Daniel before. I have watched Linda excuse him, fund him, and call it family. This time, my help will not be converted into another reward for entitlement. I covered my mouth with one hand. Not because the words shocked me, but because they sounded like Grandma in her clearest form. Gentle when love was needed. Precise when truth had to cut. Michael placed the statement down and slid another page forward. This is the physician's letter. Rose completed a full capacity evaluation before signing the trust, and again before the loan purchase authorization. I looked at the dates. Both were months before she died. Both before Christmas. Both before my parents even knew the trust existed. So if Mom says Grandma was confused, Michael tapped the letter. We answer with medical documentation. Then he tapped the meeting notes. If they say you pressured her, we answer with records showing you were not present for the trust design meetings. Finally, he touched Grandma's statement. If they say the trust was unfair, we answer with her intent. For the first time, I felt the whole structure around me. Not money. Not rescue. A wall built from proof. My family had always won inside conversations because they controlled tone, guilt, timing, and who got to speak first. Grandma had moved the fight somewhere. They were weaker. Paper. Dates. Doctors. Trust days. Bank records. Signed intent. What happens if they file? I asked. Michael leaned back. Then they spend a great deal of money discovering what Rose already made clear. The trust is valid. The loan purchase was valid. Your payment modification is valid. Your house is protected as long as you follow the trust terms. I breathed out slowly. And Daniel Michael opened the third folder. If he contacts another buyer or falsely represents any interest in your property, we send the Daniel letter. I almost smiled. There's really a Daniel letter. There is always a Daniel letter in families like this. Before I left, Michael gave me copies of everything and one final sealed note. This one is personal, he said. Not legal. Rose asked me to give it to you only after you understood the structure. I opened it in my car because I couldn't wait. Emily, if you are reading this, then you now know the house was never the whole point. I wanted you to learn the difference between being saved and being supported. Saved means someone carries you and reminds you forever. Supported means someone steadies the ground so you can walk on your own. I chose support because I know you. You will walk. I cried then. Sitting in the parking lot with Grandma's letter in my lap and my protected house waiting for me across town. When I got home, there was a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was cold. Emily, our attorney will be in touch. I saved the message. Forwarded it to Michael. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. 6 months later, I made the final reduced payment under Grandma Rose's protection plan 3 days early. I was working full-time again by then. Not at the same company that had laid me off, but in a better position with better people and a manager who did not treat stability like a favor. The house was still mine. The little maple tree in the front yard had new leaves. The silver key my father returned on Christmas Eve was back on the hook by the door. Not because my parents had access, but because I wanted it there as a reminder. They thought they were handing me proof of failure. Grandma turned it into proof that I survived. My mother's attorney sent one letter. Michael answered with the trust documents, the physician's capacity letters, the bank records, and Grandma's statement of intent. There was no lawsuit after that. Daniel stopped texting. Caldwell Property Solutions never contacted me again. Dad sent one email in March. I'm sorry I gave you the key that way. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. I believe you are sorry. I do not yet believe you understand. That was the truth. An apology can acknowledge an action. Understanding has to reach the years underneath it. The next Christmas, I did not go to my parents' house. I stayed home. I baked Grandma's butter cookies, made soup, and invited Mrs. Wuntry, Alvarez from next door, a coworker who had just gone through a divorce, and Patricia Lane, who stopped by with a bottle of sparkling cider and refused to let me call it a celebration. It's documentation of survival, she said. And we laughed because Grandma would have loved that. Before dinner, I placed Grandma's final letter beside the centerpiece. Not open. Just present. Supported means someone steadies the ground so you can walk on your own. That sentence became the way I understood love. People ask me if I ever forgave my family. The honest answer is complicated. I forgave the idea that they should have been different. I stopped fighting with the fantasy that one day my mother would become gentle, my father would become brave, and Daniel would become fair. But forgiveness did not mean handing them another key. Boundaries are not punishment. They are locks installed after people prove they cannot enter without damaging what is inside. Grandma did not save my house so I could spend the rest of my life proving I deserved it. She protected my home so I could finally live in it without shame. That is what cruel families steal first. Not money. Not property. Not even time. They steal your ability to feel safe in something you built yourself. But safety can be rebuilt. One payment at a time. One locked door at a time. One honest record at a time. And if your family only shows up when they think you are about to fall, let them watch from a distance while you learn to stand. Because a house is not just walls and a roof. Sometimes, it is the first place you stop asking permission to belong. A key can be returned as an insult, or it can be kept as proof that a door still belongs to you. That Christmas Eve, my father thought he was handing me the shape of my failure. He did not know Grandma Rose had already changed the meaning of the lock. My family wanted the house to become evidence against me. Something they could point to and say, "See, she was never as strong as she pretended." But a hard season is not a verdict. It is a weather system. It can pass. If the people around you stop turning the storm into a trial, Grandma's trust did not erase my responsibility. It erased their permission to enjoy my pain. That was the real gift. Not a free house. Not a miracle without effort. A fair place to breathe. Recover. And rebuild without cruel voices standing at the window waiting for collapse. Help should never make someone smaller. Real help steadies the floor beneath them. Then lets them take the next step in their own name. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.